All right, so we'll keep going with our texturing. This will basically be the last couple of steps before we finish up our rendering part of this course. So in this lesson, we will focus solely on the fabric texture. And the reason why we spend so much time on this particular material is because it has a lot of different levels of details and it's one of the more complex materials that we'll be dealing with. But it will also be one of the most rewarding ones because it will add another level of realism and detail to our image. And like with our sword, we'll be using a couple of image textures that will drive a few effects in our material. And since we're dealing with fabric, we'll need some kind of fabric texture to simulate that. And in my case, I'm using this site called textures.com. It is a paid service, but it also has free versions of each image texture. So for example, it has a 512 by 512 version of each channel here. I will be using the 248 by 248 version in this case because I'm going to need some of that detail. But if you want to find another image texture to use here, that's absolutely fine. I will leave this image linked in the lesson notes just so you can download this for educational purposes. So once you've downloaded that, we can bring it into Cinema 4D. And that is actually the only image texture that we'll be using for our fabric. The other stuff will be driven by variations of this image and some hair effects and so on. So we can start off by creating a completely new material. So I'll hit the plus icon here in our material manager. I'll name this the robe. And we will basically be using the exact same material for all of the objects that will have a fabric texture. So the poncho, the sleeves, and the collar. So we'll try and work as smart as possible just so we can avoid creating a bunch of different materials for each single object that has a fabric texture. So we'll try and just be a bit clever with this. So once we have created this robe material, I'll come into my shade graph here. I'll make sure that our nodes are visible, and I'll go ahead and hit Shift-C to search and add a texture node. And let's plug in the image that we just downloaded, which was a displacement image for the fabric texture. And once you have that loaded, I will actually go ahead and connect this texture node to the output surface here, like that. And then we'll go ahead and just select all of the objects that will be affected by the fabric material. So the poncho, the sleeves. I'll go ahead and expand this just so we can see what we're doing. So I'll also just expand the right and left arm here, select the sleeves like that, and I'll also make sure that I select the color subdivision surface. Then I'll hit right click and hit apply. And with that in place, I'll just go ahead and change our display to quick shading so we can see the mapping here properly. And I'll go ahead and hop out to my perspective view here. And I'll also just kind of shift this off because we need to do some work in this window right now. So in this case, we can't really use the triplanar node because when you use a triplanar node, you're not locking the projection of the texture. And since we have deformers and stuff, that means that the textures that we're going to project on our geometry, it will kind of slide as the wind deforms the object, which means that it will not look as if the texture is stuck to the geometry and it will kind of ruin the illusion. So that kind of means that we need to size these materials up by hand. And instead of like hopping in and doing some hardcore UV mapping, there are some really simple tricks that you can use. So what I'm going to do here is I'll actually go ahead and first double click on our robe material. I'll head into this editor tab here and I'll change the texture preview size from default to 512 by 512. And that means that it will basically see this a bit more high res just so we can see what we're doing. And what I want to do right now is basically match the size of our sleeve, our robe, and our collar texture mapping. We don't have to think about the pocket in this case because we'll add a different material for that. But for these ones, we want these to have like the same kind of distribution of stitching basically. So as you can see, this is very squished together. This is much bigger than the sleeves, for example. And a way to edit this is by editing the material tag values. So I'll just click this, which will bring up a bunch of different attributes here, and we'll go ahead and hide the material manager. So what I'll do here is just kind of drag these values around to a point where I feel like we have a good distribution of stitches that feels as if the fabric isn't just stretched out and stuff. So I'll just maybe go ahead and scale this up just a bit and like put it somewhere around maybe here, something like that. And that means I'll have to do the same thing for the sleeves. And since we have two identical models for the sleeves, I'll make sure that I select both of these so I can edit them at the same time. And I'll just kind of go around and I'll have to make them bigger, which means that I'll have to go beyond 100%. So let's try and do 200 for each. That's a bit too much. 175 for each. That's a lot better. Yeah, maybe even 166. Yeah, all right, perfect. So now we only have to do the same thing with the color, so I'll go ahead and do that. So I'll just select that, come down to the color, and I think we have to scale this V value up quite a bit. I'll scale down the U value. You can actually go ahead and hide this sweep while we're doing this, just so we can see them right next to each other. So I'm just looking at the stitching and stuff, and I think this is looking good, so I think we can move on for now. So I'll reactivate the string around the collar. And with that done, we have a good distribution of our UV maps and stuff for the material, so that sets us up for some good progress for the displacement. So I'll go ahead and plug our material back into the surface output here, and we'll go ahead and start our IPR window. I'll actually just slide this over a bit now because we don't need this as much. We'll want to view the renderer, that's the more important thing. And I'll want to make sure that I have it scaled in 100% because it's important that we can view the details now up close so we don't have it zoomed out. So I'll go ahead and start my IPR. Got some cool latex material right now. Not what we want, but we'll go ahead and sort that out. So to actually have this texture drive a displacement of the surface, we'll need to add a displacement node. And you might ask, why are you not using a bump map in this case? Because that's what we did with the sword, right? And the handle and stuff. And the reason why we use a displacement node instead of a bump map node is because we want to drive actual changes in the height of the geometry. So a bump map doesn't actually change the geometry of our objects, but displacement does. So that's why a bump map is much easier on the performance, while a displacement, you need a lot of subdivisions, which means a lot of detail, which means a lot of heavy work for your computer, basically. So we want to use this as little as possible, but for our fabric, it's really crucial that we use this because that will give it just another level of detail. So we'll go ahead and add a displacement node. So I'll hit Shift-C, type in displacement, add a displacement node like that. And we'll go ahead and plug our texture into the displacement node, texture, text map, and we'll plug the displacement in, not to the surface, but we'll come up here to the blue square, which will give us a drop down where it says displacement. So that's where we'll be adding this. And now this won't do anything. And that is because we need to tell Cinema that you need to activate displacement for this one particular object. So we'll start by doing this for the poncho, just so you can see what this does. So I'll right click here at the poncho. I'll add a render tag, redshift object tag. And here under the geometry tab, we have this geometry section here. And this is kind of where we do all of our subdivisions and displacement within the renderer. So I'll go ahead and hit override here. And this is when things might get a bit heavy for you. So I'll actually just pause the IPR just so we can do this without rendering. So I'll hit override here. I'll hit enable for the tessellation. And this is basically the smoothing part and adding a bunch of geometry to your model. So I'll set the maximum subdivisions to 4. I don't want crazy amount of subdivisions because that's going to make the computer run really, really slow. And I'll set the minimum edge length to 1. And we can go ahead and enable displacement. I'll set the maximum displacement to 5 in case we want to increase it beyond 1. And I'll basically leave all of the other settings as they are. And now when we activate our render, you can see what this has done to our poncho. And I'll just hold shift and activate our region render just so we can see what this does. And now you're kind of seeing that we are having some proper changes to our geometry. Like our edges are getting affected by this. This is not just some kind of illusion which is created in the computer. So this is actually happening. And to see more clearly what's happening to your geometry, we can go ahead and activate clay mode here. So once you click this sphere, we'll go into basically a clay render mode, so you don't have any reflections or anything. This is just shadows and basically white colors. So this is looking great. So I'll go ahead and reactivate our beauty render. And I can pause the IPR and we'll go ahead and copy this redshift object tag that we added to the poncho to the different parts of the collar and the sleeves as well. So I'll just go ahead and hold Command or Control and drop it on the collar and the sleeves like that. And once we go ahead and activate our IPR again, you'll see that these changes have been made for our other objects as well. Perfect. Now it is looking a bit shiny, this material, and fabric isn't as reflective as plastic. So we'll go ahead and edit the reflections of our material. So I'll just up the roughness, but we want to remain the reflection weight because we do want some kind of reflection of the surrounding areas. And I think I want like a bit more displacement in our material as well. So I'll come into the redshift displacement node and I'll set the scale to 2 instead of 1 and see what that does. Oh yeah, that's a lot of displacement. Maybe 1.5. And I think we actually can go ahead and hide our pocket currently and deactivate it because, as I said, we'll be adding another material to that one, so we don't need to bother with it currently. So I'll just come down to our poncho and I'll deactivate the extrude object here, just so we're not using any performance unnecessarily for that. And I'll go ahead and hide the pocket. All right, so let's add some color and some additional elements to this. So since I know that we're going to use a bunch of additional elements to our color, I'll just go ahead and create a color layer as we've done before, like that. I'll go ahead and zoom out a bit and just move things a bit out of the way so we have some space to plug things in. And for the robe, I kind of want some dark red kind of color. So we'll just go ahead and dial that in. So maybe somewhere around here. I'll just go ahead and just tweak this until we find a place where we're happy. So maybe something like that. I'll go ahead and plug this into our diffuse like this. And let's see how this looks. Right, since we have our layer 1 enabled, we'll need to disable that. It's hard to see these things when you have such a big UI. All right, perfect. Now we're getting somewhere. Now this is starting to look really, really nice, but an additional trick that I really like to use, which doesn't really require any additional textures or anything like that, is just basically using your displacement texture to drive a part of the color elements as well. And I'll show you how we're going to do that. So I'll take our redshift texture here. I will create a new node that we haven't created yet, I believe, which is a ramp node. And it's basically just a way for us to kind of crush certain colors. So for example, this is a black and white image. So I want to kind of crush the black parts of it and bring some of the white parts up. So it's basically going to work like a brightness and contrast thing like you would use in Photoshop. It's just that you're going to dial the black and whites individually. So I'll go ahead and hit Shift C. We'll create a ramp node like that. And if we come down here, you'll see that it's basically just a gradient. And we'll take our redshift texture node and we'll plug that into the ramp. And I'll plug this into our surface here so you can see how this works, because I believe that it's nice to just kind of explain how this node can help you. So I'll scroll down to our ramp and I'll just kind of crush the blacks a bit like this. So we're just kind of increasing the contrast in the image. And since this same image is driving the height, so the white parts of the image is driving the height outwards from our object, and the black parts is pushing the object inwards. This also means that we can basically give the idea of like this robe being dusty on the parts where the displacement is going outwards. So we can get some really nice effects by doing this. And if you don't understand, I don't blame you because it's hard to explain, but I'll show you instead. So we'll go ahead and plug this ramp into our layer 2 color in our color layer. Like that, and I'll plug back my redshift material just so we see what we do. And we'll need to activate the layer 2 here, so I'll enable that, and that will just be black and white. But if we go ahead and set the blend mode to screen, there it is, like that. Now you can kind of see what we are trying to do here. And I might have ended up reducing the black parts a bit too much, so something like that I think can work really nicely. So now, as you can see, like it feels like certain parts of the robe have like gathered dust because they are protruding from the object surface a bit more than the other parts. So I think that's a really cool effect. Might actually increase the displacement a bit again, because I did like it when it was a bit more, maybe 1.75. And now we can actually go ahead and maybe scale and rotate this texture a bit. So I'll select our Redshift texture node, scroll down to the rotate value here. And since this texture is like a diagonal pattern, so it's basically going 45 degrees. So if we rotate this 45 degrees, it should be either vertical or horizontal, like straight. So we'll see what that does. Yeah, that's giving a very different effect. Let's see if we turn it 90 degrees more. Let's see what that does. Yeah, I think I liked it better when it was at 45 actually. So I'll leave it at that. Nice. Okay. And if you want to scale the image up and down, you can do that. If you want the stitching to be a bit bigger, you scale this to a lower value. So, you can see some really cool effects here. I don't think that's the kind of effect that I want to achieve though, so I'll probably want to set it at 1 or even larger. I'll try 1.25, see what that does. That's nice actually. I'll stick with that for now, but I maybe want to reduce the strength of our like dusting effect that we have here. So I'll just kind of tone this down just a bit. So I'll reduce the strength of it. So it's still very, very present, but not as extreme. But yeah, something like that. And I mean, if you just go ahead and enable and disable layer 2, you'll see what enormous detail this little trick does. It just adds like so much, I think. It makes it feel very physical and tactile and real. And we will be doing some additional clothing details in the next lesson where we're going to add a bunch of, hair and fuss and stuff going on around the robe, which will look amazing. And I'm also realizing now that this button material has disappeared, and that is because Cinema 4D crashed while I was doing it. So I will add that in the next lessons, but it doesn't really affect you right now anyways. You'll have a nice looking button because Cinema 4D didn't crash for you. So anyways, as in my drawing, I kind of had this like wavy thing going on along the bottom of my robe, and I kind of want to do the same thing in the 3D version. And in this case, we'll actually make our own texture or pattern to do this. If you want to draw something on your own, you can go ahead and do that. Make sure that it's seamless so we can tile the textures next to each other without seeing a seam between them. But I'll show you how I'm going to do my pattern in Photoshop. So I'm just going to go ahead and open Photoshop and we'll do that. All right, so in Photoshop, I'll go ahead and create a new file. I'll make it 2000 by 2000 pixels. So we want a pretty big image. And that is just because we can. It's just good to have as much details as you can when you're doing 3D textures and stuff. So I'll set it to 2000 by 2000. Go ahead and create that. I will make our background layer. I will make that black. So I'll just color this pitch black like that. And that is because I'm going to create this wavy pattern here at the bottom. And I'm going to do that using just a few white circles. And we'll then use the white parts of that image to drive a specific color in our color layer later on in Redshift. So that's why we just make it black and white. And we could make it, the red color as a background and then use whatever color we want and just plug that into the diffuse. But then we won't be able to edit any colors in Redshift, and then we'll lose a lot of flexibility when we're working. So I usually like to work with black and white images, just use them as masks, and then do the actual color tweaking in Redshift. But yeah, enough about that. We'll go ahead and use ourselves of a ellipse tool, and I'll just go ahead and make sure that the fill is set to white, and I'll shift drag this. And here in the properties panel, I'll just make sure that it is 600 by 600 pixels, like that. And I'll just drag it down and set it so that the half circle is aligned to the bottom of our image. And I'll drag it to the middle. And I'll go ahead and copy these ones manually. So I'll make one copy and I'll just drag it so it's basically distanced 500 pixels apart. And I also see that we have a stroke on these little bastards. So I'll make sure that we don't have that. Turn off the stroke. Perfect. And I'll go ahead and make another copy, move that 500 pixels like that. I'll just go ahead and copy both of these, duplicate, and then move them 1500 like that. And the reason why I cover this entire bottom is basically just so we can, tile this texture how many times we want. So we want to make things seamless. Otherwise, we might lose some flexibility while we're working. But I'm happy with this texture. I think this will look really good. in our material. So once I'm done in Photoshop, I'll go ahead and save this, and I'll save it as a PSD, just so if I would like to make any more changes, I can. You can also save it as a PNG or a JPEG, just whatever image file that you want to use. But as I said, I'm going to save it as a PSD because then I can directly do edits in this and then just save it, hop into Cinema, and then just reload it because it will recognize the PSD as an image. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and do that. And once it's saved, we'll just hop back into Cinema. Finally, I missed it. And we'll come into our robe material here. And I'll go ahead and hit Shift-C, type in texture, and load in our newly created pattern in here, like that. And we can go ahead and activate our IPR, just so we can see what this does to our color layer. I'll go ahead and plug our newly added pattern to layer 1 mask, like this. And we'll hop into our color layer node and I'll activate layer 1, which will give us nothing. And that is probably because this texture is not mapped properly. So we'll go ahead and plug the texture into surface. And yeah, as you can tell, it's just black, which means that we need to just offset it upwards. So we'll just do that by tweaking the offset values here. And I think if we can just set this to -0.5, that will do it. Yeah, okay, all right, perfect. So I'll just tweak this a bit more, something like that. And I might scale it like this, because that will give us a few more circles. Something like that, maybe. I kind of want to make sure that the pattern feels symmetrical to her actual clothing. So I don't want, a circle to end up here. I kind of want it to align with the zipper that we just made. So maybe 1.25, 1.333. I'm just going to add some, just going to try out some different values here, but I think that works. And now, as you can tell, since we have this texture piped into the sleeves and the collar as well, it will accidentally kind of appear on these objects too. So to avoid that, I'll just come into my sleeve material tags. I'll select both of them, both the right and the left, and we'll just go ahead and try and offset the texture node here and see if we can just kind of slide it out so we hide it. That was the wrong direction, so we'll try offset V. Just slide that 10%, see what that does, and that does it. Perfect. So that's what we want, and now we can plug our material back into the surface, and there we go. Nice. The black is looking kind of sick, I gotta say, but I have decided that I'm going to go with another color. So I'll stick to my plan and do that. I'll hop down to layer 1 here and we'll go ahead and edit the color. And I kind of want the same kind of bright, like pastel-y orange thing that we have in the bandages, for example. So I'll just tweak this in, something like this. If you want another color, feel free. I'd love to see your different interpretations of this. I do not have the answer for this, as you can tell. I'm kind of just winging it. And I want to really make sure that one of the circles here end up in the middle. And that was not it, fam. Something like that. All right, perfect. This is starting to look really, really nice. I'm digging this a lot. And the more I look at it, I kind of want to increase the displacement. Anyways, so I'll change it from 175 to 2 instead. I think that's going to look really nice. Now that we've changed the colors and stuff, it's kind of given me a different perspective of it. So yeah, I think we'll go ahead and with 2. And I think that the color actually is a bit, it feels like the scaling of it is a bit off. So I'll just go ahead and plug my displacement texture into the surface again, just so I can view the scaling here. And I'll just hop down to the material tag here and just kind of tweak I'll actually pause the IPR here because this might get really, really heavy otherwise. So I'll just kind of scale this up so it's a bit bigger. So something like this might do it. All right, let's see how that looks. I'll plug the material back in the output surface. And we'll reactivate our IPR. That's better, much better. I basically just wanted to make sure that the stitching was visible enough, and it is now, so I'm happy with that. And we should not forget about our little pocket that we had. So I'll actually deactivate our IPR right now because we're not going to render. So I'll just come down to our pocket null here. I'll make it visible. I'll also reactivate the extrude like that. We'll kind of zoom in a bit here so we can bring up our material manager. And we can go ahead and duplicate our robe material because I'm happy with it as it is. So we'll duplicate it and I'll name this one pocket like that. And we can go ahead and change the color of this. So I kind of want the same color that we have on our pattern here. I want that for our pocket, and then I want the stitching here to be red. So we have some color contrasting going on here. So I'll go ahead and just copy the hexadecimal for this color to our base color. We don't need the pattern for our pocket, so I'll just go ahead and delete that texture, and I can just deactivate the layer 1 here because we don't need it. But all of the other things that we had for our fabric material, we want that. So like we did for our poncho and stuff in the beginning, we also want to make sure that the scaling and stuff is correct. So I'll go ahead and connect our displacement texture to our surface just so we can see. Oh, we actually need to add the material to the extrude as well. So here we see it. And just to make sure that we can scale this displacement texture to the same size as this one, we'll go ahead and plug our texture to our surface here again, just so we can compare them properly. So we'll head into our material tag for our pocket. I'll bring away our material manager here, and I'll just go ahead and just scale. We're basically just gonna have to scale this up quite a lot. So maybe even like 600 by 600. That actually looked quite decent. Wow, I was right on the spot. I'm actually impressed. Okay, and while we're at it, we'll also create a material for the stitching, because currently the stitching is getting affected by this material since it is within this null. So I'll bring up the material manager again, and we can actually go ahead and duplicate the bandages material. We'll call this stitching. And I want the exact same color as our robe here. So I'll head into our robe, head into the base color, and I'll copy that hexadecimal, Control C, go back into our stitching and just add that to the diffuse like that. And we will apply it to our stitching cloner here like that. So with the scaling looking good and all, we'll go ahead and replug our materials for our pocket and our robe material just so we can view them rendered. So we'll just go ahead and activate the IPR, and it's looking nice. Just to kind of triple check how the displacement is working, I'll go ahead and activate our clay mode just to see how this looks, and it's looking nice. Yeah, I really like the effect that we're getting. As you can tell, since we are displacing a lot of geometry outwards, the stitching here is kind of getting clipped, which we don't want, so we'll need to move the stitching outwards. So I'll hide our material manager. I'll come down to the transform of our cloner here, so because we can't move it out just by using the move tool because it's cloned along the spline of our pocket. So we'll need to do these changes in the transform of our cloner. And I believe we're going to do these changes in our y-axis here. So I'll just hit -1 here, see what this does. Maybe a bit too much. I'll set that to -0.5 maybe, like that. That's much better actually. The stitching is feeling a bit too vibrant, I feel like. So I believe that we can just make this a bit matter and a bit darker, just so it fits with the robe material. I'm also going to up the roughness here quite a lot, so we're not getting any speculars from this. So I think something like that works really nice. And currently the pocket feels very like integrated within the fabric, and that is because our displacement is kind of intersecting with one another. I kind of like the look that that's giving us, but if you want it to feel a bit more like attached on top of the poncho, you can just bring out our pocket null here, which will kind of give the feeling of it being more like attached on top of it, but I'll actually undo that because I liked how it looked before. And yeah, I mean, with that, I would consider us being almost completely done with the materials, which is amazing. In the next lesson, we're gonna be playing around with some hair objects, which is gonna give our fabric materials a completely new level of like detail. We'll be getting some like nice fuss and stuff going on, which is gonna do loads to our materials. So that's gonna be really fun. And after that, we're gonna leave the rendering side and move into animation. So I can't wait to show you that. And yeah, I'll see you in that lesson.